Let me ask you this question. The weight forces you to lean on God for something. How else do I know he's a way maker if the way isn't blocked? You remember the disciples? These are the disciples, the followers of Jesus. They're with Jesus. Now they see the natural. There's 5,000 men. We counted the men. There's 5,000 men, not including women and children. Some theologians believe there's about 20,000 people on the hillside. I've been to that hillside. It's unbelievable. It's almost like a natural amphitheater, just incredible. And Jesus is speaking, and they go, Jesus, we need to send the people home or to the village so they can eat. That was a nice way of saying, you talking a long time. Hey, pastor, it's time to wrap it up. They're hungry. And do you know what Jesus says? Jesus says, you feed them. Wait. They gave him a problem. This is notice they didn't bring him a real solution. Send them home, get them out of the presence of God, get them away from hearing your voice, take them out of a life-changing environment so they can feed the natural. And he says, you feed them. Fresh out of a buffet. He says, what do you have? And what did they have? They had 5 loaves and 2 fish from some kid. We don't know if they robbed the kid. We don't know what we have. This what you want us to do right here? And Jesus said, yeah. I can make anything out of something, but I just need something to work with. If you'll bring me what you have, what's not enough in your hands is more than enough in my hands. What looks like a meal for one to you is a meal for 20,000 with 12 basketfuls left over. What looks like a slingshot to you, David, is a giant killer. What looks like a lion's den to you, Daniel, is a prayer room that will shift the fabric of a nation. What looks like a cross to you is a bridge to salvation for all humanity. What looks like a tomb to you is a holding place for the miraculous, where we're able to say the dead was dead, but he's alive. It'll shift your perspective. You got to get past the natural. Notice in verse 13, before he even gives her a word from God, he says, don't be afraid. That's a word for you. Don't be afraid. I know you're gonna have fear, but let your fear fuel your faith. And here's why. The third blessing of a wait is simply this. The wait is a test. It's a test. Turn to your neighbor and say, it's a test. I don't like tests. You know why I don't like tests? Because we find out if you've done the homework. A test is just to find out if you've actually read the material. Because you can go to class and not learn anything. I've talked to some of y'all. Got a college degree, can't spell. I've seen some of y'all's posts on social media. I texted some of y'all, I'm like, hey, punctuation is important. A test tells me what you've actually picked up, what you've actually learned. So God will test you with a weight. Now, it's one thing to hear the word from God, hear the instruction from God. Notice, she's got instructions from God and she's got a word from God in that order. She's got instructions and now she has a promise. Here's what you do. Here's what's gonna happen if you do. Now she's gotta go home and bake bread. Now she's gotta go home and bake bread for the prophet. First. Everybody say first. This matters. Here's why. Because God always wants first. God, can I tell you this? God doesn't need everything in your life. He just needs the first things. It's a test. That's why I challenge you. Multiple weeks throughout the month, I challenge you on the weekend. Hey, it's the first 15 challenge. Give God the first 15 minutes of your day. 5 minutes in worship, 5 minutes in the word, and then 5 minutes in prayer. Hey, just turn on some worship music. We just released a song Over Again. Turn it on. It's about 5 minutes long. Worship to it. And then get in the word. Read the word for 5 minutes. And then pray and talk to God for 5 minutes. Give him the first part of your day. God always wants the first. Why do you think the principle of first fruits preceded the law of where tithing was introduced? This whole idea, the principle of tithe, preceded the law by 400 years. Why? Because God wants first. I don't have time to teach this for a long time, but if you have 10 $100 bills, which one is God's? It's the first one, not the last one. That takes no faith. If she went home and said, I'm gonna bake the bread, I'm gonna bake the bread, I'm gonna bake the bread, I'm gonna feed my son. Why? Because my children are first, right? My kids come first. That's the problem with some of y'all's marriages is your kids come first. Mm-hmm. You're like, what's wrong with that? Google it. And then I'm gonna feed me, because hey, if I'm dead, and then whatever I have left over, I'll give God. Can I tell you what would have happened? She would have died because she wouldn't have had anything left over. Because a miracle that takes no faith isn't a miracle, kids. It's just a moment in your life. It takes faith to let God have the first. It's one thing to pray, but now I have to go. It's one thing to pray and say, oh God, I trust you, but now I actually have to give. This is so important. It's one thing to say, when I get blessed with $1 million, I'm gonna feed the children of Africa. But have you been involved in a Serve project? Y'all love me? I know I'm pushing you, but at some point you gotta take a step of faith. Why? Because a faith that can't be tested is a faith that can't be trusted. I gotta know that it's gonna stand up, and God always gives his people an opportunity to get in on what he's doing. And it's always a test, always, it's always a test.